Hey guys, it's Okapi Plays here and welcome back to another video, and I'm sure you can tell by the thumbnail and title of this video, I'm going to be building habitat for the Gobi Ibex. We are back once again in San Pedro de Atacama Zoo after under a week, which I think is a personal record. In today's episode, we're going to be building a rocky mountain plateau for Gobi Ibex. Now this is one of the species that I'd always had planned for the suit, and I thought you'd make pretty good entrance animal to the Gobi section. And in a lot of Himalayan folklore, they represent resilience. So I thought it's accidentally kind of a fitting animal to put in to start of what is hopefully going to be quite a large zoo. As you can see this part of the video, we're making a moat. And this is actually part of what has inspired into build from Tiergarten Nürnberg, which is apparently a very good zoo to go to. I've never been personally because it's located in Germany, but they have this amazing dry moat and huge mountain for alpine ibex. But since we're starting a Gobi section for the Gobi Desert in China, and I thought we should probably build for the Gobi Ibex. Now, as I said, this place is inspired by Tiergarten Nürnberg. However, I did take some creative liberties in some places, like with lots of parts of the mountain, I just took general shape but adapted it so that it was traversable in-game. Also, I included a moat with water, but Tiergarten doesn't actually have a moat. It has sort of like a dry barrier, but I thought this is just so it's more of a deterrent for the ibex to stop climbing out. While I'm on the topic of climbing, we may as well talk about my channel's growth. When I started this channel, I was on 10 subscribers who were just random people who just subbed to my profile, but now I've actually grown to 43 subscribers, so I want to thank you guys so much. It really helps the channel, and now more people are starting to see and starting to like my videos. So let's also talk about amazingly positive comments I've been getting, and I'd like to thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Now what I'm building here is sort of a rock barrier using Cesar creates rock walls. These truly are a lifesaver, and yes, I know that this would not actually work for a real ibex as they'd just be able to climb it or jump it very easily, but we are playing a game here, so I thought it would be alright. And as you can see, I did map out the habitat with some grass terrain paint, and that will be gone in the cinematics, so don't worry. And I spent quite a long time working on this moat and the retaining wall, but I just really wanted to try and make sure it looked good, and which I think I'm pretty happy with the end result. And as you'll see in the cinematics, I had to work around the mountain so that it would still be traversable for the ibex, and so I decided to make it quite a bit smaller than the habitat in Tiergarten, but that was to make sure that they could access every part of it except for where I didn't want them to, which in the end it did work out really well. I covered the whole thing with rocks and vines just to try and make it look more realistic, and like it's in the middle of a parched desert, which I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. As you can see here, I'm lining up all the broken, cracked pieces of the rocks, and I just think that makes it look a lot more realistic, like it was intended for the goats to climb on, as you'll see in the cinematics, so I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. So now let's talk about some facts regarding the Gobi Ibex. The Gobi Ibex is actually subspecies of Siberian ibex that has been adapted to the Gobi Desert, living in very dry and rocky places, and so they've developed quite a lighter coloration and to help them blend into the rocks and sand. They also have a very adapted digestive system that has been evolved specifically in this subspecies to allow them to take out as much moisture as they can from the dry desert plants. They've also been known to travel very, very far and in order to find water. Males of this species are quite a lot larger with massive curved horns, which are really impressive to see in real life if you ever have, which they use when they're fighting for a mate, and females have much shorter, slimmer horns that are quite a bit straighter as well compared to the males. As you can see here back in game and starting to build up the barrier on the outside. Now with this, I'm trying not to line up the crack was quite as much, so it looks harder for the goats to climb, which was my intention. And as you'll see shortly, I add a wall with hot wire on it, I imagine, so that the goats could not escape. If they tried to climb over, it will just give them a small bit of a shock, and it will make them stay away. I did struggle quite a bit with trying to keep the ibex in realistically because obviously the whole habitat's covered in rock walls and they would be easily able to climb it, but I just decided if we covered it with 2 layers of fences and hot wire, then it should be enough to deter them from trying to escape. I'm using the rustic walls once again from the Europe pack because I think it has a really nice texture to use in addition to desert rocks. I think it blends in so nicely, and as you'll see in a bit, I put faux rocks on top, which is a technique I like to use in quite a lot of my builds to make it look as if it actually has texture because it is quite flat. I'm starting to build a shelter. I used the rusted panels from the Australia pack, and because I thought the grid pieces were too big and bulky for the vibe I was going for, Once again, I'm using the Indonesian stained wood because I think it has a really nice texture, and the fact that you can change the wood color as well as the stain color makes a really nice texture. I'm fencing off the sides of the shelter mainly because I thought it makes it look a bit more cozy and homely, and because that is their only shelter. I do add an indoor area roundabout now, but it's not actually functional. I did just add a little pen in there, and just for realism, but it wouldn't actually work in real life. With the roof of this building actually extended it by a meter and then split all of it from the group, so that could move it across and make it look like it had a slight overhang, because I didn't want any curved roofs, as I was going for more flat roofs, like almost like a desert village, and that you'd find somewhere in Mongolia or China. So I thought this made it really look quite nice, as you can see. And I did add a custom door on the front, and I just added a wood panel in front of one of the metal doors. Then I got started with some more detail, and I added some thinner rocks. And the rock, that it's kind of got a slant to it, which makes it able for the Ibex to actually access it. So it looked really good at the end. When they climb up it, I did also add a water trough inside one of the rocks, and the Ibex can actually use, and the keepers can fill up. But for some reason they choose not to, and instead they go down to the end to the muddy water in the moat, which I did find quite strange, but they seem to prefer that for some reason. I added some bedding underneath the platform where they go to sleep, and they can't actually get up onto the roof, which is a bit of a shame because I thought it would be quite cool if they could, but it's no big deal. I extended that. I'm shelter a bit, give them more room, because we do have 7 here, and not including babies, so we need quite a lot of space. And so I started to work on the exterior fence, and I used the same color that I used for the shelter, because I want each area of the zoo to have its own colors. Like this area will be beige with sage green, and maybe for the South American area it can be more clay red like the entrance area, and maybe for Africa it could have lots of yellows and blues. I'm not sure, I'm just spitballing here, but that they were just when I thought could work. Now you can see I'm starting to work on the indoor area for the Ibex, and like I said, once again, it's not functional, but I thought I'd include a holding pen for if we need to separate one of them, or if one gets injured, or maybe even if one is having a baby, that's where we could place them. And I made my own fences and just stuck on the door with some hinges, and it's really easy to anyone could use very simply without having to go into too much detail. I personally don't love doing interiors, and I think they're quite boring, to be honest, especially if no one sees them. But I thought I may as well just do a simple one just to make the YouTube people happy. And again, the keepers have to walk through a few walls to get there, but no one's going to see that. It'll be covered up by plants anyway. Speaking of plants, that's what we're moving on to next, and I thought I'd use lots of grasses just after I did this wall here. And that's where I used to faux rocks to make it look more realistic. And after I added the hot wire, and I placed some of the smallest faux rocks from the free update with the aquatic pack and just recolored into the look, like the texture of the wall. And from far away, it looks really great. You can't even tell it. It's not 2 different pieces. I was going to add them to the side, maybe not, because then you might have just smoothed it over. I did also add them to the bottom, near the keeper area, just to add some realism. And now, we move on to the pebbles. Now this took me so long, and especially with all the rock work that I had to do, I cut out a lot of things from this video, and like the sheer amount of placing rocks that I had to do. All these small faux rocks are from Cesar Creates. I used them just as a guide just to show me where to place the plants, and I did a few in the water as well, along with some moss, but that didn't come up until later. I moved on to the fencing now, and this again took quite a while because as I covered the whole perimeter of the habitat, it was just to make sure no guests fell in or anything, and I did think it worked out quite well as long as you don't look too closely at the details. Now in the real zoo in Tiergarten, and they have so many rocks everywhere, it's a really good habitat, and if I'm honest, for Ibex, and I definitely did not do it justice, I did not add nearly as many rocks as they have in the real life zoo, and I thought maybe I could make up for it with some plant work, and that's exactly what I tried to do. And so I started adding short grasses and like the buffalo grass and all along the fence, and just because, as I always say, the exterior of a habitat matters just as much as the interior. So that is exactly what I did, and so I added lots of short grasses, some dring grass and more agave plants, and I had to free some of my meerkats there who kept getting themselves trapped. And while we're talking about the real zoo, only a few months after it actually opened, the Second World War started, and then unfortunately a lot of the animals died because there was a significant lack of food and staff to look after them. But at the end of the war in 1947, the zoo was guarded by the US American Guard, who watched over the zoo from major looting, and by the end of the 1950s, all reconstruction for the zoo was actually complete. And in about 1960, the zoo reached its pre-war level once again. Now finally, after so long of fencing and rockwork, we are onto the planting. This is always my favorite part of building habitats because it really makes a habitat stand out for others. And as you can see, I was adding quite a few bristlecone pine branches, and I did put a few dry plants on top to make it look like the saxaul plant found all over the Gobi Desert, because I just think this plant is so unique and interesting. So I really wanted to include them in this area, and I did that. Obviously add my favorites, the drin grass, the buffalo grass, and the dry bushes. They just really make any desert habitat really pop in my opinion. I did also add some flowering bushes that I actually love adding these into habitats, and I'm sure you can tell they're all around the zoo. I added one big yew tree in the middle as well, and that is just to add some shade for the ibexes if they don't want to go to their shelter. Now, we're at the end of the video, so I did add a few trees, just as a final touch, and some climbing plants and some flipped upside down plants, and from the Oceania pack, as I said in my meerkat video, I think it makes it look like a really nice desert grass. So, I'd just like to thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next video.